My boss treated me like trash until he realized who I really was. I was just another regular worker at the company. Nothing special, nothing fancy, just another guy trying to get by. But my boss, oh, he made sure to remind me every single day that I was beneath him. He talked down to me, humiliated me in front of others, and made sure I knew I was nothing more than a replaceable cog in the machine. But then, something happened. Something he never saw coming. One day, he learned the truth about who I really was. And suddenly, everything changed. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I started working at this company about a year ago. Nothing fancy, just a regular office job, pushing papers, answering emails, and making sure things ran smoothly. I wasn't looking for anything special, just a steady paycheck to get by. But my boss, Mr. Carter, he made every single day a living hell. From the moment I stepped foot in the office, he had it out for me. It was like he enjoyed making my life miserable. If there was a mistake, even if it wasn't mine, he'd call me out in front of everyone. If there was extra work to be done, he dumped it on my desk last minute. He didn't just criticize, he humiliated. "Do you even know how to do your job, or are you just here to waste my time?" He once sneered at me in front of the whole team. I wanted to fire back, to say something, anything. But I needed this job. Rent wasn't going to pay itself, and I wasn't in a position to walk away. So I swallowed my pride and took it. Every insult, every unfair demand, every degrading comment. The worst part? He treated others just fine. Sure, he was strict, but no one else got the level of hatred I did. It felt personal, like he had a vendetta against me for some reason. But I kept my head down and did my work. I told myself it didn't matter. He was just a boss, just a guy on a power trip. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. One day, I was going to make him regret treating me like this. And that day was coming sooner than he could ever imagine. I wish I could say things got better, but they didn't. In fact, they got worse. Mr. Carter seemed to take a special kind of joy in making my life miserable. If I clocked in even a minute late, he'd make a scene about it in front of everyone. If I sent an email with the smallest typo, he'd forward it to the entire team, highlighting my incompetence. It was like he was determined to break me, to prove that I didn't belong here. And for the longest time, I let him. I told myself that if I just kept my head down and did my job, maybe, just maybe, he'd eventually back off. But that was wishful thinking. If anything, my silence made him worse. He knew I wouldn't fight back, so he kept pushing. One day, he called me into his office. I figured it was just another pointless meeting where he'd nitpick something and make me feel like garbage. But this time, he took it to a whole new level. "I don't know why I even keep you around," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're slow, sloppy, and honestly, if it were up to me, you'd be gone already." I clenched my fists under the desk, forcing myself to stay calm. "I get my work done," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I meet every deadline. I do everything that's asked of me." He scoffed. "Yeah, and yet somehow, you still manage to be the weakest link in this office. You should be grateful I even let you keep this job." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to take this anymore. He thought I was just some nobody, just another low-level worker with no power, no say. What he didn't know, what he never even bothered to look into, was who I really was. And soon, he was going to find out. I walked out of Mr. Carter's office that day with my blood boiling. The way he looked at me, the way he spoke to me like I was some disposable nobody, it lit something inside me. But instead of blowing up, instead of throwing my resignation on his desk like he probably wanted, I took a deep breath and reminded myself, he has no idea who he's messing with. See, what Mr. Carter didn't know, what no one in that office knew, was that I wasn't just some random worker scraping by. I had connections, deep ones that went higher than he could ever dream of. Because the truth was, I wasn't just an employee at this company, I was the owner's son. Yep, my father was the CEO, the man who had built this company from the ground up. But I never flaunted it, never mentioned it, because I wanted to prove myself. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to work my way up, to learn the business from the ground level, to understand the struggles of the employees before I eventually stepped into a leadership role. And that's exactly why I took an entry-level position under a fake last name, keeping my identity a secret. My father agreed to it, even supported the idea, saying it would be the best way to truly earn my place. But now I was starting to regret that decision. Because if this was how Mr. Carter treated employees he thought were powerless, how many others had suffered under him? How many people had he pushed around just because he could? That night, I didn't just sit around stewing in my anger. I did my research. I went through employee complaints, old HR reports, anything I could find. And the more I dug, the worse it got. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Mr. Carter had been getting away with this for years, and he had no idea that his reign of terror was about to come crashing down. The more I dug into Mr. Carter's history, the angrier I got. This wasn't just some power-hungry boss with a bad attitude. This guy was a full-blown tyrant. I found complaint after complaint buried deep in HR reports. Employees had quit because of him. Some even had to take medical leave due to stress. A few had tried to report him, but somehow nothing ever stuck. He knew how to play the system, how to intimidate people just enough to keep them from pushing back. It was disgusting, and I realized something. If I hadn't been in this position, if I hadn't been treated the way I was, I might have never known. But now I had the power to do something about it. So I put a plan in motion. First, I started documenting everything, every insult, every unfair punishment, every shady move he made. I kept records, forwarded emails to my personal account, and even started keeping a log of my interactions with him. Next, I reached out to a few ex-employees who had filed complaints against him. I wanted to hear their stories directly, and what they told me only made my resolve stronger. Some of them had left because they had to. He had made their lives unbearable. Others tried to fight back, but somehow their concerns never made it to upper management. It was clear. Mr. Carter had friends in the right places. He had built a little kingdom where he was untouchable. But what he didn't know, what he never saw coming, was that he had been mistreating the one person he couldn't afford to mess with. And now, it was time to bring his kingdom down. With all the evidence I had gathered, I knew it was time to make my move. But I wasn't going to do it recklessly. No, if I was going to take Mr. Carter down, I wanted it to be airtight, undeniable. So, I set the stage. First, I reached out to my father. Up until this point, I hadn't told him anything about what was happening. I wanted to handle it on my own, to prove to myself that I could. But now, I needed his backing. We set up a meeting, an executive meeting, one that Mr. Carter had no idea was coming. I also reached out to HR, presenting them with the complaints I had gathered. Funny thing, they acted shocked at first. We had no idea things were this bad, they claimed. But I wasn't buying it. Either they were incompetent or they were covering for him. Didn't matter, because soon everyone was going to know the truth. Then came the final touch. I scheduled a one-on-one with Mr. Carter himself. The day of the meeting, I walked into his office like I always had. Except this time, I wasn't just some lowly employee trying to survive his wrath. This time, I was in control. He barely looked up from his computer. "What do you want?" he grumbled. "If this is about your poor performance, I don't have time." I slid a folder onto his desk. "I think you do have time for this." He frowned but opened it. The moment he saw what was inside, I saw the color drain from his face. Inside was everything. Screenshots of his emails, records of his complaints, testimonies from employees, past and present, a dossier of every single thing he had done to make this office a nightmare. What is this?" he stammered, flipping through the pages. I leaned in, voice calm but firm. This is your career ending." For the first time since I'd met him, Mr. Carter looked scared. He flipped through the documents, his fingers twitching as he skimmed the reports, the emails, the written testimonies from former employees. His face, usually smug and full of arrogance, was now blank with shock. This is ridiculous," he finally sputtered. "Where did you even get this? Who put you up to this?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "No one. I did my research. Turns out, when you treat people like garbage, they don't mind telling their stories." His eyes darted to me, narrowing as he tried to regain control. "You think you can just threaten me with this? You don't have the power to do anything." I smirked. "That's where you're wrong." I pulled another folder from my bag and placed it on his desk. This one goes straight to corporate. Oh, and there's an extra copy for the legal team, just in case things get messy." He went pale. He knew this wasn't just a bluff. Then I went in for the final blow. "You should know," I said, standing up, "that I've also scheduled a meeting with the board. They'll be reviewing your entire history at this company, and you really don't want to know who arranged that meeting." Mr. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. Because, see, the CEO, the guy who actually owns this company, yeah, he's my father. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, blinking as if he had just misheard what I said. What? He whispered. I chuckled. Yeah, bet you didn't see that one coming, huh? His hands clenched into fists. That's impossible. If you were the CEO's son, why would you be here? I shrugged. Because I wanted to learn. Because I wanted to earn my place in this company without special treatment. And up until now, I kept quiet. But you gave me no choice. He was shaking now, and I could see the panic setting in. He wasn't just some office bully anymore. He was a man who knew his time was up, and I was going to make sure of it. Mr. Carter's face twisted, cycling through emotions, disbelief, anger, desperation. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally slammed his hands on the desk. This is a setup, he hissed. You think you can just waltz in here and take me down? I've been running this place for years. Your father trusts me, I smirked. Not anymore. That was when I pulled out my phone and, without breaking eye contact, tapped the screen. On speaker, my father's voice rang out. Son, is he there with you? Mr. Carter's breath hitched. I held the phone up. Yeah, Dad, he's right here. A long pause. Then my father sighed. Good. Carter, I've just finished reviewing everything my son sent over. Frankly, I'm disgusted. Mr. Carter tried to speak, but my father cut him off. I gave you years of trust, Carter. I put you in a position to lead, and this is how you treat our employees? My father's voice was cold, controlled. I don't tolerate abuse of power in my company. I watched as Mr. Carter sank into his chair, his fingers gripping the edges of his desk so tightly his knuckles went white. Effective immediately, my father continued. You are suspended from your position while our legal team reviews your conduct. I strongly suggest you start looking for another job, because after this, you won't be working here ever again. Silence. The air was thick with tension. Mr. Carter's jaw worked, like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but he had nothing left. He knew it was over. You can't do this, he whispered, but his voice lacked any real strength. I already have, my father said. Security will escort you out shortly. And with that, the call ended. I lowered my phone, watching as Mr. Carter sat there, stunned, his entire world crumbling around him. For the first time ever, he had no power. And damn, it felt good to watch him realize it. Mr. Carter sat there, frozen. The once mighty tyrant of the office, the guy who had made everyone's life miserable for years, now looked like a lost, desperate man. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly, and for the first time, he had nothing to say. Then, like clockwork, 2 security guards stepped into his office. Mr. Carter, one of them said, voice firm but professional, we need you to come with us. He snapped his head up. This is a mistake. You can't just throw me out like this. I've given years to this company. One of the guards stepped forward, already reaching for the access card clipped to Carter's belt. Sir, let's not make this difficult. For a moment, I thought he might actually resist, throw a tantrum, make a scene. But then he looked at me, and something in his expression shifted. He realized I was still standing there, watching, and I think that hit him the hardest. Without another word, he slumped in his chair, let the guard unclip his access card, and slowly stood up. I stepped aside as they led him out of his own office. He didn't look back. The moment the door shut behind them, I let out a long breath. It was over. For the first time in months, I felt free. But it didn't end there. My father followed through with everything he promised. An internal investigation uncovered even more dirt on Carter. Misuse of company funds, sketchy promotions, and even a few serious HR violations that HR had conveniently buried. When everything was said and done, he wasn't just fired, he was blacklisted from the industry. No company in our field would touch him after what came to light. As for me, I finally got the chance to sit down with my father and talk, not as an employee, but as his son. I told him why I had chosen to start at the bottom, why I wanted to prove myself, and to my surprise, he actually respected it. He told me that my actions showed leadership, and that when the time was right, I'd earn my place at the top, not just because of my name, but because of what I could do. That meant more to me than any promotion ever could. The office changed after Carter left. The tension that had once loomed over everyone seemed to vanish overnight. People smiled more, talked more, and for the first time in a long time, work actually felt good. And as I walked through the halls, no longer just another nameless worker, but someone who had made a difference, I knew one thing for sure. No one like Carter would ever run this place again. It's crazy how power can blind some people. Mr. Carter thought he was untouchable, until he wasn't. Treating people with basic respect isn't hard, but some people let their egos get in the way. And when that happens, they always fall. What do you think? Have you ever had a boss like Carter? How did you deal with it? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And before you go, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.